Well, good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody. Our, our rectangle full of dear faces. Here we all are. Can you hear me, by the way? Sound on? Okay. Yeah, here we are in community, engaging in Zazen, embodying the Buddha way. These three refuges. And in this, we are refugees. We're refugees. That is, if we practice refuge in the Dharma, we say we take refuge and we receive refuge in this moment in time. We formally take refuge when we receive Jukai, the 16 precepts. And, but of course, mostly our life is not formal, it's informal. So that's the refuge that I want to talk about tonight together, look into, and encourage us all to look into what is the refuge in my life as it unfolds. How do I regard everything that comes my way as an opportunity to deepen my refuge, deepen refuge? We can be continually receiving refuge by how we live in our moment by moment enactment of our life. Right now. Right now is where we live the timeless refuge. So one aspect of living continuous refuge is living in the timeless and recognizing the timeless that is true in this moment. This is a moment in time, but it's also more fully lived, having nothing to do with time. So we'll be considering together now this timeless nature of refuge, in that it isn't a single act in just this moment, as separate from the moment, but it's a continual enactment in all the flow of moments that make up our life whole, the wholeness of our life. It's always unfolding. And we can do this. We can engage continuous refuge as soon as we realize we can do it. It's kind of instantaneous. We can be a refuge of a person of refuge, of true refuge. And one of the things that I think of when I think of refuge is the feeling of finding my way to refuge, the relief of it, the ease of it, the support of it. We talk a lot about refuge in this tradition. When we take refuge in the three treasures, we are joining an ancient tribe of those who want to discover the deepest course for living, for being really conscious and awake, and for opening to our own potential. And the potential for awakening that everyone has, everyone we share our life with. We seek refuge from the storm of ordinary life. We seek refuge in the storm of ordinary life, while also recognizing that ordinary life is exactly where refuge is found. Nowhere else, only here. And only in this circumstance, in this moment. Anything beside what's here and now is a plan or a fantasy or a memory. And so it can be really helpful to look into this refuge. What's meant by refuge? Where is it found? How is it found? How is refuge to be found in the muck of everyday life? How do we live out and live into our Buddha nature? If now is the only time, then refuge is the only now. It seems like every week I say the same things, only using slightly different language to point. And that's true for all of us in our life. We're always living the same life, but it's new. It's fresh each moment. So it's helpful to look into what we take refuge in. Are we taking refuge? Are you taking refuge in the drama of your self-concerns and all the usual problems that make up your life? Are you worried about whether you measure up, whether you'll have enough, whether you're lovable, whether you're guilty, whether you're innocent or successful or a failure? Getting caught up in that as refuge is not the timeless refuge. That's the refuge in time, which is marked by suffering and discontent and difficulties. This is taking refuge in confusion and judgment and heavy feeling states and suffering and dissatisfaction and dis-ease. Really, it's taking refuge in the trance of the separate self. So taking continuous refuge in the Dharma, awake and present, we accept our life as it is, just now, however it is, including all of those difficulties, with a kind of respect and interest in what is this? What is this? Can I appreciate how complicated and evolving my life is? Everything that's going on right now, can I appreciate it? There's so much to keep track of. Can I appreciate that? Even while I'm sequestered for the time being, can I appreciate this? And taking refuge in liberated heart mind right now, in the midst of things, the current conditions, really helps us meet these conditions just as they are and bring our whole self forward just as it is, warts and all, unfettered by fear or shame or judgment, just present to whatever is, including when we experience fear and shame and judgment. This is not an attempt to have some kind of experience of life where we are not touched by life. Because good luck with that, first of all, that's not very practical. And secondly, what's the problem with being touched by life? This rich, mystical life, so brief. So in Zen practice, we really take up our life just as it is. And this is asking a lot. Zen practice is really radical. You can't just turn off your automatic reactions. I can't. I can't say, I'm not going to feel this shame, for instance. And I use shame because that's something that I find particularly compelling when I get hit by it. And there's a lot to look into when that experience comes up. It's really powerful. It's really powerful. So it's shame is a powerful body-mind experience. It's like an enormous ocean wave crashing over us. And just like any other strong emotion, just like fear or anger. So refuge may be allowing yourself just to feel, first of all, that's where we begin. And at the same time recognizing, as soon as we can recollect, this is an emotion. This is in my body. This is a powerful storm of energy. And it's a story about not measuring up. So refuge, when we take refuge in this kind of situation, we can get liberated from suffering in that the practice of refuge in the moment helps us recognize our narrative for what it is and recognize all the aspects of our experience for what it is. And we see it as a story, not as a self. We see it as an energy, not as a self. And can bring a really tender heart to the suffering quality. The kind of unbearableness. I'm thinking of shame. Shame is unbearable. We can really see and be very tender. So seeing it as a story, as an experience, not as who I am. No matter how often I've experienced this, and no matter how much I have organized my life in order to avoid experiencing this. But instead, at this moment, with recollection, being able to pull up the big mind of awareness that opens around this tight, miserable self of a me that's caught, that gets caught, and bear witness with the compassion of Buddha. This is taking refuge in Buddha, taking refuge in Dharma, taking refuge in our practice. All of the long line, and we're taking refuge in the Sangha. We're taking refuge in all the long line of humans reaching back into the timeless past who also bore witness to this kind of experience and found their way to see the nature of it, and in that be free of it. Be free of the identifying with it. The Sangha of awakened ones is always with us, bearing witness, being compassionate companions in our awakening and reminding us our refuge in wide awareness. If we put together, if we add together, if we mix the awareness of all of us here, it's a lot of awareness. That's calling on refuge in the Sangha. So we can say that we're taking refuge whenever we're fully present in this moment and have access when we need it, whenever we need it. Remembering to access awareness beyond contraction. And that's really what we're doing with refuge. It's remembering to have access this clear and open mind that knows the nature of our experience. They can look at it, they can allow it, not have to fend it off, and not have to identify with it as only who we are. So a really important aspect of refuge is recollection. One of the sublime qualities of the Buddha, leading to mental tranquility and abiding joy. Bringing the mind to mind the vow and liberation from obstruction. When we recollect the Buddha way, we recollect the teachings in the Dharma, reminding ourselves of the vow to awaken from this suffering right now. This is what practice can help us with. What better time to remember this vow than in the midst of our suffering? Remembering the vow to end suffering, not just in the future, but right now, in this particular moment of suffering, whatever, or dissatisfaction or restlessness, anything that is so unpleasant that we constrict around it and diminish our life. So sitting in Zazen is rather a perfect opportunity to cultivate refuge, which is why we do this every day, why we really emphasize Zazen. A regular practice of Zazen helps us to slowly discover over time, through time, how to actually take refuge when we're in Zazen. How do we take refuge during Zazen? And let go of all the distracting pathways in our thinking mind, not be bound to follow them, not have to follow and get caught by the sense disturbances, pain in the knees or the back or the jaw, and simply relax into the posture of Zazen and relax into attention in this moment, just as it is, which can be painful in the knees. It can be, a time to contemplate some problem in your life. It happens. And we can very productively contemplate and see it with a larger heart. Like cultivating any field, finding the right posture. If we're out in the field cultivating in our garden, we have to attend to the posture that we're using and use the right tools, and attending to the weeds and watering at the right times, just enough for the health and vitality of what grows in the rows. So it is in Zazen. We find the right posture. We relax into the breath. We water awareness. And then before you know it, a thought comes up and fills the screen, throwing visual pictures before the mind's eye, maybe, and stirring reactive energies. But then in Zazen, we hold steady and notice, oh, here, a thought. And then it just dissipates. So the thought might be something like, did I leave the flame on under the soup? And then I can get involved in smelling. Do I smell it? And then I picture, I get involved in solving this problem. So then I might picture, so what did I do? And I rehearse again my activities as I wound down cooking to get ready for the sit tonight. And only then do I remember turning off the stove. Oh yeah, I turned it off. And then I come back to Zazen, and that thought stream fades into nothing. Is this familiar with you, this kind of a process? I mean, this is something that comes up in Zazen. It's not a big deal, but it's just it can help us get wise to see how this goes, because it happens not only in Zazen, it happens all the time. And there's nothing wrong with it, especially when we see what it is. And then I see what it is, and then I return 100% attention in Zazen to the body, the breath, awareness, until the next thought comes up. Maybe a sound outside triggers it, or a memory pops up, or a physical sensation. And then we go through that again. And then we recollect and we come back. Take refuge in this moment, in this breath of Zazen. And each time I have the capacity to return to wholeness in this moment. And I'm taking refuge. I'm practicing refuge in wholeness in this very one moment of Zazen. But how much of every day do we spend in Zazen? Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe some days we only think of it. maybe a half hour, maybe an hour, occasionally more when we're at retreat. But all the rest of our life is spent in activity and thought and talk and work and emotions and sleep. And what happens to refuge? If we engage continuous refuge, then we have the capacity to be wholly present, to bring the body of the whole self forward into every activity of the day. And we talk all the time about how to bring practice into activity. But we also, and especially, can bring practice into our difficult mind states. Mind states such as sadness, shame, as I've talked about, or dread, or anxiety, whatever still haunts us from the trauma of our early lives. We call it trauma, but really, growing up, trauma refers to something that anybody, any healthy person would have ill effects from a certain experience, right? And most of us growing up, even in the best circumstances, have probably experienced difficulties that we were not equipped to handle. Things that came up as a child that we were not equipped to handle, and yet we had to, and we got hurt. And we make decisions at that time that we carry into our lives based on the hurt, based on whether it led to deciding that the world is okay, or that we are or are not okay in our personhood and who we are, the self. So early decisions that were made in a traumatic context are consequential for everything that we experience thereafter. If we decided the world was unfriendly, or we're not okay, we're not worthy, then we bring forward that decision into all of our relationships. And they are skewed, they are answerable to this decision. And this really affects whether we can be happy or be satisfied, or whether we can safely relax enough in Zazen to be present, whether we can grow, or whether we are going to get stuck in an endless loop of familiar troubles and frustrations and disappointments that we don't recover from. Some of you may really identify with what I'm describing. It certainly has been my experience. If we encounter enough of a challenge and see that nothing we have tried has made life significantly better, we might seek out a solution such as Zen, which is an extreme practice. It's really extreme to sit and do nothing, but thorough. One that requires us to stop, look, and listen fiercely and continually. But the Zen way will also be experienced just like every other experience in our life up until then, as long as our lens is fixed in this traumatic early situation. So it's only when we become aware that we are looking through this lens, established so long ago, and one that was honed and polished according to an early narrative, harmful narrative of unworthiness, that we begin to realize true refuge and the meaning of refuge. And we wake up. We wake up to refuge. We are not that traumatized being. We have a capacity to be Buddha, to be free, to be open. We have the capability to clarify the the inner child world in all of its hurt and worry, and to deeply respect that hurt without wanting to continue to maintain it. We can look beyond it and act beyond it, and act from a sense of possibility and fresh, immediate, open, rich. These are the treasures, the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. This is the refuge that we're taking. Awakening to our suffering habit patterns doesn't necessarily end them. Sometimes that's the expectation. Oh, when I'm really awake, I'm not going to feel this anymore. I'm not going to go here anymore. Well, maybe, but more likely, we just see these more clearly when they come up. And we can recover if we get triggered and closed down. And we can recover. Refuge. We can reach to refuge and recover our true home and our Buddha heart. So continuous refuge really is the path of Zen, this moment by moment presence. So I want to read a couple of things. One is a little quote from Ajahn Chah, who is a great Theravadan teacher. He says, Buddha is timeless, unborn, unrelated to any body, any history, any place. Buddha is the ground of all being, the realization of the truth of the unmoving mind. So the Buddha was not enlightened in India. In fact, he was never enlightened, was never born, and never died. This timeless Buddha is our true home, our abiding place. When we take refuge in the innermost Dharma, we rest in the eternal freedom. Zen ancestor Wangpo's words proclaim, your true nature is something never lost to you, even in the moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It is the nature of your own mind, the source of all things, your original luminous brilliance. So this is the refuge. So Cold Mountain, I don't know if you know of this poet, Cold Mountain. He's a wonderful timeless Zen poet. And here's one of his poems translated by Peter Levitt. Sitting just here on a flat stone, the valley stream is bitter cold. Quietly, I appreciate its utter beauty, my empty cave lost in the mist. When I observe my mind ground, a lotus comes out of the muddy water. So taking refuge is observing the mind ground, being fully present. We all have this capacity when we live continuous refuge. May it be so. Thank you.